And welcome to another podcast episode. Today I'm joined with Christine Rankin and Peter Cooke, business advisors to the Engine Limited, to talk about leading with courage, the strength of vulnerability in leadership. In today's podcast episode, we will explore the concept of vulnerability in leadership and how it can be a powerful tool for effective and authentic leadership. We'll dive into the importance of embracing vulnerability, the challenges it may present, and the positive impact it can have on individuals, teams, and organisations. Thank you for joining us as we uncover the strength that lies within vulnerability and how it can shape exceptional leaders. Let's start with you, Christine. What does vulnerability mean in the context of leadership, and why is it important for leaders to embrace it?
Well, for me, it's about being willing to share yourself. You know, you're not some distant person in a room with the door closed, as I often say. You're out there amongst your people, and you show your vulnerability when you share yourself. So yes, there's a point where you don't want to be oversharing them and telling them everything, but they need to know who you are to be able to understand the kind of pressures that you work under, and for you to lead them in that really open and supportive way. It creates an environment where, because they know you and they appreciate the things about you, they relate to you better. And I think it creates a very confident workplace where people tell you what they're thinking and the things that they're going through. And as a leader, I don't think there's anything wrong with sharing with your people the challenges of business. At the moment, business is really tough, and you can't pretend that it's not. It's better to share it and find a way together to move forward. Being vulnerable isn't a weakness, and I think a lot of people feel if you share very much, or if you have a very open environment, that makes you weak. It actually makes you very strong. And it creates an environment that people love to work in. It's real.
Yeah, look, I love how you bring that whole human element into that conversation, Christine, because when you are human, then people know that, you know, you understand where they're at as well. It's actually meeting people at the crossroads, and understanding the shoes that they're in. So thank you for bringing that human element right out first up. Peter, you are a business owner and you also have been a leader of many teams. How can leaders create a safe and supportive environment that encourages vulnerability amongst their team members?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, as Christine's just said, I think a key part of creating that safe and supportive environment is to lead by example and be prepared to express and expose who you are, and what you think and feel in specific situations, and that helps encourage others to feel confident that they can express themselves in the same way, and it builds that trust. And that's really the foundation on which you build a culture of vulnerability. Leaders that can establish that sort of level of trust by being consistently human and reliable and transparent in what they do will help build that environment. And I think a key thing that I try to practice is honouring commitments, but also putting your hand up if you haven't been able to achieve things, but also if you're feeling uncomfortable about things. And I think one of the things we forget is when we are dealing in business around risk situations or uncertainty in our business, we don't tend to express ourselves to our teams as much. And I think that vulnerability is something that we can share in a way that shows, hey, look, we are worried about where things are going. Let's work together and come up with a plan for how we're going to get there. Another key thing for me is really listening and being an active listener to the team members. So particularly valuing their input and perspectives and their concerns as well. So if we're encouraging them to express themselves and their vulnerability as well, we have to support it and acknowledge it. And really giving full attention to our teams is very important too, to help overcome some of those fears together. Open communication, absolutely crucial. Really encouraging our team to express how they're feeling, their thoughts, their concerns, without any judgment or reprisal, just so that we can all build that culture of let's share how we're feeling about these situations that we're facing as a business. And I think that's important. And that's why I really love and enjoy facilitating emotional culture workshops to get that communication going, get people expressing themselves, having more conversations about how they feel, what they want to feel more and what they want to feel less in terms of, the positive and not so positive feelings in business. And I guess for me, leaders can set an example by being open and vulnerable themselves, sharing experiences or challenges. It just helps normalize that vulnerability with the team and shows them and allows them to effectively have permission to feel the same and to share that. And sometimes it's quite good if you've made mistakes in the past as a leader and learned from it and moved forward. It's good to share those in the same way we share our successes, sometimes sharing how we felt when confronted by difficult situations, but also how we overcome it is a good way to encourage people to feel comfortable in that space as well.
Wow, gosh, you two have certainly done a lot of homework over the weekend. Some really great insights coming out there, and I guess as a leader, when you step up and own a mistake you've made and show the learning, it's all, like you said, it's demonstrating, that you take responsibility and that it's okay for other people to own it and learn from it. So some really great insights coming out there. And Peter, I love that whole emotional culture workshop because, how do I feel? How do I want to feel? How do others feel? It's really getting to a drill down, sort of drill down approach of understanding that business and behaviours. So really love the facilitation that we do there. Christine, I'm going to come back to you. What are some of the common misconceptions or fears that leaders may have about being vulnerable, and how can they overcome them?
Well, I think it's the lack of understanding of what real leadership is. You know that I love transformational leadership. It's the leadership I practice and believe in. And that is all about a very personal way of leading. So people know your story. They know about you. They know what you believe in and what you want for them and what you want for the organisation. Sharing those things and regularly sharing them to inspire people and to motivate and energise them is really important. But a lot of people, because they're not, in New Zealand, because we don't value leadership, we don't talk about the components of it a lot. And one of those components is your vulnerability and your sharing things. As I said before, you've got to share you. I think in learning how to do this, there is a line. You don't want to be in there crying every day because something's gone wrong. You've got to be very professional about it. But it humanizes you to be able to share the things that are happening in your life and that are happening in the organisation and how you're feeling about certain things. Look, I had 6,000 staff. I used to go out 2 days of every week to my front line in different parts of New Zealand, and I'd sit at people's desks, and I'm terrible with names, but I never forgot a person's circumstances. So I might go back to that office 4 or 5 months later, and I'd remember that their husband had cancer or their child had a terrible accident, and I'd go straight up and ask that. And, I still meet people on the street who say, but you never forgot this, or you always remembered that I had this issue. That is so precious in leadership. People want do things for you when they know you and they care about you and they know that you care about them. And to some people, that seems weak. Well, you're way off track. That's how you gain that loyalty and that sharing and caring in an organisation. And we all need that. Life is damned hard in business and personally. You just need to know that it's never wise to make your senior team, for example, close personal friends, because that can really backfire when something goes wrong. So it's learning what the line is, but being open about you and the circumstances of you and the business, in my opinion. And it's certainly been my practice, Catherine.
Oh, look, Christine, you've just given some really clear examples there. And, like you said, actually being able to draw on what you know about someone to then be able to go back, even if you're in an organisation of from 5 up to 100 people, life gets so busy, but to be able to go back to the person and just check in as to where they're at. And, I've got past employees that I've hired that always check in with me because, having lost my mum and my brother in the last year, they understand the importance and my vulnerability around that, and that whole check-in thing. It just it just kind of like, it's an evolution. It just keeps happening and happening and happening. And I guess the hardest thing that I hear all the time is that whole exploitation. Like, there are people that will exploit your vulnerability, and I've had that happen. And we'll cover off more on that as we go through the podcast. But Christine, if we could just keep drawing on what you've been talking about, what about some personal experiences or even examples of leaders who've successfully demonstrated vulnerability and the positive outcomes they've achieved? So what personal experiences have you had that's achieved a positive outcome?
Well, I just want to actually go back to you. You just talked about losing your mum and your brother, and you have shared that. And because people love you, because you've been a leader and you do things for them, because they love you, they support you, and that creates a closeness. It's not unprofessional. It doesn't create anything negative. People know that you're human, that was an incredibly painful thing for you to go through. I had some really interesting leaders too in the public sector, and Dame Margaret Baisley was my boss for a long time. And she's one hell of a character. People look at her and you think she's a little old lady that looked like the Queen, and she carried a handbag in exactly the same way, and that handbag had some interesting things in it. But, she would share her vulnerability. In fact, she was a shocker. She would say things that would take my breath away sometimes in front of a lot of people. But, that humanized her too, because she was an icon in the public service, and people were very afraid of her, including me. Believe you me, there were many times I was afraid of Dame Margaret and stepping over the line. But she humanized herself by telling stories of when she was the matron of a mental hospital, a hospital for mental patients, and the character she had in there. And they would be dreadful stories, but because she shared them, it made her far more approachable, and she was a real character. We had a love-hate relationship, and I could tell you many things about that because she was so entertaining, but I was very fond of her despite the difficulties. Was somebody that determined, and people might say that about me, Catherine, so I better stop there.
Yeah, look, there's a lot that can be said about learning from the older generation. Peter, as soon as Christine talked about the lady with the handbag, it reminded me of our friend's mother in Italy, who we call her the Queen, and the insights and stories that come out of that lady's mouth is just inspirational. And we've all had people before us that have been leaders of their time, and they've paved the way. And somehow, however, gets lost in translation, there is that whole exploitation of people's vulnerability, and that's extremely sad. So look, I guess for me, I'm always meeting business owners where they are at on their journey. In doing so, I draw on my own experiences or experience of others I admire and their vulnerability as a leader. I really aspire to the demonstrated vulnerability of Sir John Kirwan, a former All Black rugby player and mental health advocate. For those of you that watched the All Blacks on Sunday, what a sensational game that was. But back to John Kirwan, he openly shared his personal battle with depression and anxiety, which was a significant departure from the traditional tough and unbreakable image associated with rugby players. By sharing his struggles, Kirwan helped reduce the stigma around mental health issues in New Zealand and encourage others to seek help when needed. The positive outcome of Kirwan's vulnerability was a nationwide conversation was started about mental health that increased awareness and greater access to support services. Still a lot of work to be done in that space, but he used this platform to drive change and make a lasting impact on mental health advocacy in New Zealand. And this showcases just how vulnerability can be a powerful force for positive change and getting people to talk about it. I often talk with business owners about my own business journey in adversity. Peter, do you have any examples for you and for other leaders that have inspired you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've had a number of leaders that have express their own vulnerability when dealing with situations that some leaders take on all the stress of and don't share and don't sort of divulge how they're feeling about situations, and sometimes that can burn them out and be damaging. But the really inspirational leaders I've had are the ones who have being comfortable sharing the fact that there is a difficult time or a difficult decision or a risky situation that they need to share, they're not able to necessarily cope with, or they don't have all the answers for, and need the team to help. And I think that's another one from a leader's point of view that I've learned, is we don't have to have all the answers, we don't have to have all the solutions, and we don't have to take on all of the burden, albeit we have accountability and authority and responsibility as part of our roles, but we're certainly entitled to share how we're feeling about some of those situations, and it gives freedom to other people to then feel comfortable sharing the same thing, because often if a leader's got a concern or is feeling stressed about something, the team probably are as well, and it's good to share it so then they can collaborate to move forward. I guess if you look at a sort of an iconic example of a New Zealand leader sharing his moments of self-doubt and fear, Edmund Hillary is a classic example of that. And in his autobiography, he openly shares those moments where he didn't think he was going to be able to make it. He was fearful, he was vulnerable during what was obviously an incredibly challenging expedition. And sharing those experiences, as much as him being a hero, he also was able to become humanized as a leader in the eyes of the public. And instead of portraying him as this infallible hero who just sort of strode up a mountain, he acknowledged how he was feeling about real risks of uncertainty and that doubt about will we make it, will we even come back. And so I think strong examples of really powerful leaders who understand, express their vulnerability and use it to their advantage. His examples are classic.
Yeah, look, I think we can all relate to Sir Edmund Hillary as being an inspirational leader, and he certainly pushed boundaries that most people thought were impossible. And I love how we can take the I am away from impossible and make it possible, because really the only roadblock that's in our way is ourselves. So Christine, coming back to you, can you elaborate on how vulnerability, when exhibited by leaders, team members, or individuals within an organisation, plays a pivotal role to nurturing, the team and just really having that positive impact?
Well, once staff know you, and once they feel that you haven't got everything under control either, and you've had your challenges, and challenges happen every day, and you share how tough some of those times are, that makes you real to them, and they relate to you in a totally different way. So I encourage all leaders to practice that vulnerability. It's not easy when you start if you've never been used to doing it, but once you've done it once, you'll see the reaction and you'll feel the change around you. It's really worth it.
I guess it really is about being your authentic self, right, Christine?
Oh, authenticity is really important. I mean, if you think back to that television series, The Office, where, that was a perfect example, wasn't it, of getting it all wrong. But being authentic, showing who you are, is the thing that, as I say, that creates the environment where people know that it's okay for them to be vulnerable too, but to still absolutely thrive, because we learn most from our mistakes, and we learn from looking back. The things we worry about are often things that never ever eventuate. So I think it's that vulnerability is just a precious gift to your staff and to your organisation.
Oh, look, I like how you say it's a gift. I mean, Christine and Peter, whenever I'm talking to clients, I quite often hear them talking about the mistakes that people are making in their organisation. And I say to them, so what are you doing to contribute to that mistake? And they look at me a little bit puzzled, and they're like, I had nothing to do with it. And I go, well, you had everything to do with it, because if we're learning from that mistake, it means you won't be talking to me about the mistakes that people are making. You'll be talking about how do we develop them? How do we create insights and build learnings from it to be able to develop the people? So, everyone has a role to play. Christine, just off the back of that question, are there any specific strategies or techniques you being a leadership specialist can use to effectively communicate vulnerability without compromising their authority or credibility?
think it's about picking your moment. You know, you don't do it all the time. There'll be someone will be talking to you about something, or you might have all your staff together and you're discussing what's going on in the business and what you want them to achieve. And you'll pick up the moment that it's right to share something, and you get better and better at that as you practice it. We do have to pick our moments. You can't do it all the time. You're creating an environment and you're picking your times in that where it's appropriate to share something. Someone will set you off. They'll say they're worried about something, or there'll be a situation. You know that if you share your experience in that, and it's probably something that's gone wrong or that you're concerned about, that's what feeds that positivity and that really good reaction to you.
Thanks, Christine. And look, I want to keep this kind of upbeat and positive, but I guess the reality is myself and many others have had some hard fall and been exploited by others when being vulnerable. It almost makes you feel like, what do I say? When do I say it? Who do I trust? Who do I not trust? And it can be really quite soul destroying. Peter, what are the potential risks or challenges that leaders may face when being vulnerable, and how can they navigate through them? I mean, we just talked about exploitation. How do they navigate through avoiding that?
Yeah, I guess, as leaders, we face risks such as perceived weakness or loss of authority, or even just being judged for expressing ourselves and our vulnerability. And I think that exploitation is a risk and an issue. And so really to navigate through that, as Christine said before, we need to really select carefully when and how we express that vulnerability by maintaining the professionalism, seeing it as an opportunity to emphasize personal growth for people, because when we do share ourselves with people and express ourselves as to who we are, it helps us grow and others grow as well. And that it leads by example. I think the key thing is creating that culture of trust and openness within the team means that when people do share vulnerability, it's not exploited. It's actually done in a trusted and open environment, and it's seen as a strength and something that can be utilized as a way to improve and grow people within the business. And I think it's also really important that we foster an environment where vulnerability is respected and not seen as a weakness or an opportunity for exploitation.
Yeah, look, those are all really good tips and thought processes. I guess, if I'm talking about my own personal vulnerability, when I'm representing my clients, I represent them and I can be really, really tough in terms of achieving. And when I say tough, I'm tough, but I'm fair and reasonable. But I'm also a very sensitive soul, and it takes a lot to deal with something when you've been exploited over something, over your vulnerability. But one thing I've come to learn, as much as I still have to keep practicing at it, is to put things in a box and put the lid on and then come back to the situation. Because if I keep focusing on it, it just ends up pulling me down. And this is something I talk to my clients often. You'll receive an email. It might be something to do with, the way you've approached something or whatever. Take a pause, put that email into a file on your email box and deal with it later. So these are just some of the tips that I work with, because, when you react to something, then the reaction just becomes another reaction on top of another reaction. So it's sometimes better, and more often or not better, to just take that pause. Christine, you understand firsthand when vulnerability is exploited. You and I, we share the same war stories at different times in our life. How did you cope when you were exploited at various times in your career?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I don't think I've learned a lot from it, but I'm still vulnerable. I'm still very trusting, and that's got me into trouble quite recently, actually, in an employment situation. So, you can have, my experience was profound, and I don't think it's ever happened to anyone else in New Zealand, and to the extent it happened to me. It went on for years and years and years. And I would say that there was a time I was the most hated person in New Zealand. And, I had bullets with my name carved on them. I had a police protection squad because they truly thought someone was going to kill me. And that was because there was a story out there about me that I wasn't allowed to comment on. I wasn't allowed to balance up. And I cannot tell you what it was like to go through that. And for my people, I had to appear strong and vulnerable. So with them personally, they knew how vulnerable I was, but I had a responsibility to protect them and to stand up for them and to fight for them to the last moment, because they didn't deserve to be pulled into what was happening to me, but they were. You know, I taught myself not to cry during that time. I used to be a terrible crier, and I taught myself not to cry. Now I find it very difficult to cry. It's got to be something major. But because of that, New Zealand thought and still think that I'm a really hard woman, that I don't feel anything. I'm very vulnerable and I'm very sensitive. People, even when you share your vulnerability, and boy, they must have known how tough that was for me every single day to be discussed by the nation in the most disgusting way. That was really hard. I think a lot of people would have taken their lives, but because I'd been vulnerable with my people before, they came around me like an army. They loved and looked after me every day through that time, or I would never have survived. And it's quite a story, and I hope it never happens to anyone else. I don't think it would happen today. It was over 20 years ago. It was horrifying. You know, there was effigies of me burnt in the street. It was big, and it was nasty, and it was hard, and I've never given in, and I've proved how good I am at what I do, and I have never gone away, much to the chagrin of the then government. I've never gone away. I have had plenty to say personally and publicly, and I will never stop being brave about what I believe in, but it hasn't been easy.
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage and bravery. I mean, not here to talk about politics today, but, you know, even when Jacinda Ardern stood up in front of the whole nation and said she had nothing left in the tank and needed to step down, rather than everyone just accepting that that's where she's at, it was just disgusting and disgraceful to see so many people belittle her. And yet, you know, we have to take a real good look at ourselves as to why we do that. At the end of the day, it can take someone to, you know, a place that becomes even further harder to come back from. So, you know, we really need to take a look at why we react to certain vulnerabilities and exploit people, because it's just so wrong on so many levels. Christine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you also got treated like that as well. I just want to acknowledge that it's unacceptable behaviour, and you know, I've also got a similar story of death threats that I've had, and throughout my life as being an entrepreneur, and you know, it's absolutely horrific, and it's not until you've been in those shoes that you actually can understand another person and what they're going through in a similar situation. So, Christine, absolutely want to say I'm sorry that you had that happen to you as well. So it's probably why we get on so well, right? So anyway, I'm going to change the mood a little bit. Peter, you've had a lot to do with change management. How can vulnerability be leveraged to drive innovation, creativity, and problem solving within a team or organisation?
Yeah, I mean, a short answer, given I think we're starting to get to the end of the podcast, is that it can really be used as a driver for innovation and creativity and help teams to problem solve. I think when team members feel really safe sharing their ideas, sharing their experiences, sharing how they're feeling, you get a much better collaboration and culture within the team, which I think is absolutely important. And, you know, leveraging vulnerability in this way means you can tap into the potential of your team to help, you know, come up with those creative and more effective problem-solving processes.
Thanks, Peter. I guess we're just going to be running out of time, so we might need to run this into a whole nother different session, but just let's look at the cultural or organisation factors that may hinder leaders from embracing vulnerability. Peter, let's just have a little bit of a thought process on you. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they can hinder leaders from embracing their vulnerability, particularly in organisations that have a strong emphasis on hierarchy and traditional, what I would call fairly archaic leadership models, which actually discourage leaders from being vulnerable and actually sharing it because it's perceived as weakness. So I think that still exists, unfortunately, and those are barriers to leaders being able to demonstrate that, and that means they can't share with their teams, and they can't then encourage their teams to also express their vulnerability and see the value of it. So those factors are hard to overcome, but I think if you are a business owner and you are leading by example, helping your team to establish an understanding around their emotional intelligence, being communicative, having feedback mechanisms in place to express concerns, then I think that can help foster that environment and actually overcome some of those barriers, which is really important.
Thanks, Peter. Christine, back to you. Leaders need to strike a balance between being vulnerable and maintaining a sense of resilience and strength in challenging situations. Christine, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, you definitely can do both. It's about practicing, and one without the other won't work. You've got to do both. And I think that you just learn to pick your moments. Giving feedback, which is a key part of leadership, is a way to weave your vulnerability into that situation. And that's the way that you can start. You need to give feedback to people about themselves, and that's a way in. But look, don't hold back on this, because it will change everything. It will actually change productivity, because you create a working environment that people love. So don't hesitate. As a leader, do it. Please, please do it. Don't be a typical Kiwi and hold it all back. Just do it.
Thanks, Christine. Look, we're just about out of time, so I'm probably going to wrap this up, and I think we'll do part 2 on this. But I guess, finally, from my point of view, leaders should seek support networks and mentors just like us here at the Engine, who can support you and offer guidance, a safe space for vulnerability, and without undermining your authority. By balancing vulnerability with resilience and strength, leaders can inspire trust, foster team cohesion, and effectively navigate challenging situations while maintaining their leadership credibility. We here at the Engine also offer a service called a co-pilot service, where we go in and we actually help you carry the load. So we're not there as a shareholder, but we go in and help you carry the load, shoulder the load, and also enable you to have a break, so you can go away uninterrupted and come back refreshed. So just want to leave it there today. We'll come back with a part 2. Christine, Peter, thank you so much for your time this morning. Look forward to catching up with you on part 2. And for the rest of you, have a great week. Thank you.